Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me on this educational and mandatory learning adventure. Today, we're going to be talking about some of our most common policies and procedures. And I'll be your host. I'm Jeremiah Kibler, the Honors Hall RHC. Before we get started, let's take a second to look at our learning objectives. Now that you're familiar with those, how about we get things rolling? Knowing the policies. So in this session, we're talking about many of the policies, which are really important because you all are the ones on the front lines working to build strong communities. One of the ways you do that is to make sure people know and follow our community standards. But I can almost guarantee that you will not know or understand all the policies and resources after this presentation. We just don't have the time, and we aren't face-to-face to bounce off questions to each other. So in addition to this training, you'll need to review all the policies on your own time. Talk to your RHC for clarification on things you don't fully understand, and don't forget to get advice from your peers. What is important is that you feel comfortable with the policies in order to help you be consistent. Because when something is confusing, then it makes it hard or even impossible to be consistent. So what exactly is consistency? The Oxford Online Dictionary defines it as acting or done in the same way over time, especially so as to be fair or accurate. This is why consistency is key. If we've seen anything in the world today, we know that we all want to be treated fairly. Consistency between students and with staff members is crucial. I think entrepreneur and author Jim Rohn stated it perfectly when he said, "Success is neither magical nor mysterious. Success is the natural consequence of consistently applying basic fundamentals." So where can you find our community standards of conduct? Well, they're all located on our housing website at housing.wvu.edu. You'll want to make sure to bookmark this page and refer to it on a regular basis. It has all sorts of information on there that will be helpful for not only you, but also your residents. So make sure to give them that address too. In addition to the housing policies, you'll also find information on COVID-19. So like I said, really great resource for you. In addition to our housing website, you'll want to check out eCampus on a regular basis as well. All of our presentations will be housed there, along with other resources like our conduct manuals and other worksheets that you will receive over this training time and throughout the year. We want our students to feel at home here at West Virginia University. However, that doesn't mean that they can bring anything and everything back into our residence halls. Now, we don't have time to go over that entire list, but I would really recommend you going to our housing webpage and checking out the not permitted items list. Some of the things that you will most likely come into contact throughout the course of the year are things like candles, aromatic plug-ins like the Glade and Airwick ones that you plug into the outlet. Those are not permitted by order of the state fire marshal. Also, animals and things like that. So take a look at that list. It's really good, but I will say that is not comprehensive. The university reserves the right to add things to that list that may disrupt the community. If a non-permitted item that is not a significant risk to the student or community is found, you should notify the resident of the policy violation and instruct them to remove the item from the building within 24 hours. You would then document the student and advocate. In the following days, the building RHC will work with the appropriate RA to follow up with the room and verify that the item has been removed. If the item was not removed, the student will be documented again. Now, if an item poses a significant risk to the student or community, it should be confiscated. I mentioned earlier that candles and aromatic plug-ins are examples of items that we immediately confiscate. But I also want to briefly mention alcohol and alcohol containers. If you do come across these, you'll need to have the students empty the container in a sink and then have them dispose of the items in the presence of a staff member. If the student states that the container has a sentimental value, the empty container can be confiscated and kept in the designated storage location. The conduct officer will determine if the item can be returned. You may come across items like BB guns, paintball guns, decorative swords. If the item is actively being used to cause harm, you must contact UPD immediately and then notify the appropriate RHC. If the item is found in a room and there is no evidence of immediate harm to self or community, you should notify the student that the item is not permitted and that the item needs to be removed from WVU property. You should then notify the building RHC about the incident and document the incident in Advocate. If it's during the RHC's regular office hours, you should contact the RHC immediately. If it's outside the RHC's regular office hours, you should email the RHC and include the incident report number. The building RHC will go to the room to speak with the resident about immediately removing the item from WVU property and that the item is not permitted back. If they cannot immediately remove the item from the building, it will be confiscated. Remember, if there is a concern for personal safety related to the incident or student involved, UPD can be contacted to assist with removing the item. If you come across things like firearms, tasers, stun guns, explosives, dangerous chemicals, obviously, contact university police immediately. As far as storage and claiming, confiscated items will be placed in a designated secure area in the building. Make sure to check with your RHC to find out where this is. Items need to be labeled with the date of confiscation, the owner's name, and room number. Items need to be logged on the confiscation log sheet. The student will then have 30 days to reclaim the item and to remove it from the building. After 30 days, the item will be thrown away. The log sheet will need to be updated. If the owner claims the confiscated item, the log sheet will be updated and signed by the owner. So how do we come across policy violations? Whether we're sitting in our room or on a community walk, how do we know when to approach a situation? It's not like our residents tell us. Okay, well, sometimes they do. But for the most part, we have to use a combination of the following. First, what do you smell? The first thing that comes to my mind, and probably yours, is the smell of marijuana. These situations are usually pretty obvious, but there are other important things that you want to pay attention to your nose. Do you smell smoke? Do you smell trash? Are there hygiene issues going on? Also, you want to take a look at what's going on around you, right? On your community walks, this is not a time for you to try to break the world record in speed walking. Make sure you're looking at your bulletin boards, your lounges, your residence doors. Do you see vandalism? Do you see paper that has been burned? Do you see the resident that's been passed out in the stairwell for a few hours? And then keep your ears open. If you hear someone behind the door say, "Pass me another beer," and that does happen, can I get an amen from the returners? You'll definitely want to check those situations out. And also, social media, our friend/enemy. What people post still amazes me. So, if you see it, you do have to address it, whether it's on Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, any of those social media platforms, you've got to check it out. But remember, we're not the social media police. So when can we go into a student's room? Well, this is possible because of our housing contract. And our housing contract is something that our students sign even before they pick their room for WVU. The housing contract allows us to go into a room for repairs and maintenance, for recovery of university or government property, for fire, health, and safety inspections. And this also includes our break closing inspections. And also when we believe that there's an emergency or if there's a reasonable basis for believing that a policy is being violated. So those are all the reasons that we can go in. Now, we absolutely cannot go in for things like pranks on a resident or a staff member, surprise birthday parties, even though that would be a wonderful gesture. Or you or someone else has left something in a friend's room and you don't have permission to retrieve it. Or even when a parent asks to go into their student's room. And I would just remind you that abusing your official staff keys can lead to serious disciplinary actions, including termination. To go into a student room, you always have to have permission, whether it's from the resident or from your supervisor or the on-call RHC, you always have to get permission to go into a student room. You always have to have another staff member present as well. Now, these situations can tend to be stressful for not only you, but also for the other students involved. So, to help make sure things don't escalate unnecessarily, always be respectful. Pretty common sense, right? When you are in a room, you want to do a visual scan. Who's in the room? Are there any safety concerns? And do you see any policy violations glaring at you, like a candle burning on a table or a beer bottle in the trash can? And I always want you to consider your safety first. If you don't feel safe, leave. Have that exit plan ready to go. And I'd also mention, assume that you're being recorded. Everyone has a cell phone, right? But regardless, if you're going in for a policy violation discussion or you're doing a break closing, people have cameras in the rooms from time to time. So you need to think about that. Now, there are things that we absolutely do not want you to do. Never, ever go into a room alone, as I mentioned before. Don't put yourself in harm's way. You are more important than a policy violation. And for goodness sakes, you don't have to go chasing after people. If they get out, they get out. We will document the situation as best as we can with the information that we can gather from the other people. Now, never open up anything when you're in a room. You're always going to have the students do that for you. So if you need to see in the refrigerator because you've seen alcohol containers in a trash can or on a desk, then say, I need you to open up the refrigerator. You need to be very assertive in that matter. If you go in timid, they're more likely to say no. Now, if they do say no, you ask them again, be assertive once again, and say, I need you to do this. If in the end they refuse to do it, there's no need to escalate the situation. Just document as much as you can, and then let the hall coordinator hear the case, and they'll take it from there. So what do we do if you knock on a door and no answer? Well, we mentioned earlier, one of the reasons we can go into a room is for basis of an emergency. So like accidents or sickness, dangers to health, things along those lines. Remember to always seek permission from the appropriate supervisor to enter the room. Now, the only caveat to that is if first responders are on scene, like UPD or EMS or even firefighters, if they say, please let me into this room right now, then go ahead and follow their commands. After the fact, make sure you contact the RHC, the appropriate RHC, to let them know. Also, for ongoing loud and obnoxious sound disrupting the community. So, if this is going on and there's no response, loud music, TV, people, make sure you do seek that permission from the appropriate supervisor to key into the room. And then we want you to follow these scenarios that are on the screen. So knock 3 times, announce, I'm Residence Life staff, please open the door, and wait 3 seconds, repeat twice. If there's no response, then key into the room. After the door is opened, so you're not flinging the door open and rushing in. So before the door is open and before entering, loudly announce, hello, I'm so-and-so, and I'm with the Residence Life office. Is anyone in the room? Wait for a response. Then, if no response, staff should announce, I'm coming into the room, and then enter the room to address the issue. If other policy violations are discovered, then you can address those. If it's not a safety concern and not an ongoing loud or obnoxious sound, then if the residents don't open the door, staff should not key into the room. What we want you to do is just document the situation and advocate with everyone that's assigned to that room and file the report. So when do we take photos? Well, the short answer is when there's physical evidence of a policy violation. I do want you to keep in mind that when you're entering a room for a policy violation, it's already a stressful situation for all individuals. So taking photos of the space while the student is present can add to the feeling of intrusiveness and increase the tension of the situation. So if you feel that the circumstance is not safe, you should just forgo taking the pictures. That's okay. For your convenience, you are permitted to use your own camera on your cell phone. When it comes to vandalism or destruction of property photos, these photos really need to illustrate the scope and extent of the damage. So this may mean taking several pictures from different angles. When alcohol is present and students are also there, make sure you have the students empty the alcohol first, then gather the containers together and take a photo. Please avoid taking photos of where it's found in the room. Describe the type, amount, and location of the containers in the incident report. When alcohol is found and students are not present, for example, during break room checks, you can take pictures of where you find the alcohol. Then describe the type, amount, and location of the containers in the incident report. Under no circumstances should you ever share your photos with the media or the news. You should never share your photos with other individuals, including fellow staff members. Never take photos for personal entertainment. And then absolutely never upload your photos to social media. Now, if you do not want to use your personal cell phone, there is an iPad with a camera available in each building. Just speak to your supervisor or RHC about access. Once the photo has been uploaded to Advocate, the photo must be deleted from the device it was taken from. Okay, how about we talk about some residence hall policies? First, disruption and/or interference with personal rights and freedoms. This was actually our second most charged policy last year. It was used 955 times. And let's not forget that we were gone for most of the spring semester. This is one of our core policies to help develop and maintain an environment that is conducive to both academic and personal success. It's very broad and can cover a variety of issues. It's mostly used to address loud, indecent, or disorderly behaviors that are disrupting community. You will typically encounter noise violations either during your community walks, or you may hear loud noises from the hall when they are in their rooms. Discretion should be used when gauging whether noise is disruptive and which noise levels are appropriate. Make sure to have these conversations with your fellow team members so you all are consistent enforcing this policy. This policy is also used to address intimidation, coercion, and threats to both our students and staff. Unfortunately, depending on the circumstances, this crosses into a gray area and will sometimes conflict with the student's right to freedom of speech. When this happens, it can be confusing and frustrating. But when this happens, we consult other offices such as legal counsel, DEI, or the conduct office for guidance. When dealing with a disruption situation, the focus of this policy is on the behavior and if it is being disruptive. If it is a one-time behavior that is significant enough to disrupt the entire community, it should be addressed by staff and documented in Advocate. Now, if there is a minor concern that is momentary and not ongoing, staff should speak to that individual behavior so that it doesn't become disruptive. If there are several minor issues or the same issue is repeated multiple times after the staff has addressed it, it should be documented in Advocate. Room responsibility. Residents may not occupy or use space of a potential roommate if there is a vacancy in their room. And rooms should also be kept in a condition that does not create a health or safety hazard. This includes excessive room trash. Issues regarding excessive trash and residents occupying the unassigned areas of a room typically come up at break closings, during room checks, when there's complaints of odors, and responding to incidents in rooms. Housekeeping staff will also talk to you or your RAC about unsafe conditions. So keep your eyes open during physical occupancy reports and intentional interactions. Some things to remember with dealing with this policy. Staff must provide in their incident report photos of over-occupying the room and/or trash that's all around the room, along with a concise description. Resident assistants should be mindful of sensitivity needs in investigating these issues. Consult with your supervisor for guidance if you're unsure with your approach. Staff will generally be expected to follow up with residents that over-occupy the room, but excessive trash or hygiene issues may be of interest for your RHC to handle. Now, occasionally, residents that over-occupy their rooms also tend to violate the guest visitation policy. This may even lead to housing a partner or friend who either is assigned to live elsewhere in the halls or off campus. Vandalism really does damage our community, not only our physical space, but also our sense of connection with each other and our home. Vandalism is a sporadic occurrence that has no set time or place. It can happen in broad daylight or late at night, but most commonly it will occur in the middle of the night, notably on the weekends. When you come across vandalism, it often requires more investigation, talking to people on your floor. Common issues you may experience are things like exit signs that are broken, graffiti in the hall, damage to the bulletin board, fire extinguisher sprayed, damage to your bathrooms or community spaces, or even broken windows. Staff should alert emergency maintenance about vandalized areas like bathrooms or other unsafe areas so that these spaces can be returned to normal and are safe for our students to use as soon as possible. And don't forget to take photos. Tobacco use is common in both inside and outside of our residence halls. It may be encountered as you complete your community walks, but is just as commonly discovered as you are going about your day-to-day business, like going to class or doing laundry, getting ready in the morning. You may be alerted to this violation by either the sight or smell of smoke or vapor. Violating behavior includes vaping, smoking, and the use of smokeless tobacco like snuff and chewing tobacco. While this is a campus-wide policy, staff are not asked to engage with this violation in all situations. If you encounter tobacco use on the part of a professional staff member or outside of the residential spaces, like our residence halls, our courtyards, or communal patios, then you may choose to report this behavior using the Tobacco and Smoke-Free WVU report. While tobacco and tobacco products are not allowed to be used on campus, they may be owned and possessed in the residence halls. As such, the discovery of these items does not warrant an incident report if they are found in the residence halls. This would include nicotine vape pens. So, under no circumstances are tobacco or tobacco-related products to be confiscated or disposed of. So let me just make it clear that students are permitted to have tobacco products, cigarettes, dip, e-cigarette, vape pens for tobacco purposes in their room. Watch for students covering their smoke detectors, or putting things under their door, or even burning popcorn to hide their behavior. And remember, vaping doesn't necessarily equal illegal drug use. Our residence halls are a very safe place, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be hyper-focused on fire safety. Our policy states that residents and their guests may not intentionally or unintentionally cause smoke or fire. Things like candles, incense, toasters, hot plates, and other appliances with open elements are not permitted. When on your community walks or just going throughout your day, you should be aware of possible fire hazards. Our residents and their guests must immediately evacuate the residence hall when the fire alarm is activated, even in bad weather. The fire department and facility staff will work hard to get you all back in as soon as possible. In the event that it's going to be an extended time out of the building and the weather is poor, professional staff members will work on finding an alternative waiting area until you can return. Some buildings' fire alarms are triggered more easily than others, and after a few times of an alarm going off and there's not a fire, students tend to ignore the alarm and become immune. Students who do not immediately evacuate a residence hall after a building alarm should be documented. Your advocate incident report must provide a narrative that explains the time of the alarm and the time the resident was found in the building or coming out of the building. Tampering with fire protection equipment like sprinklers, smoke detectors, pool stations may result in removal from university housing and possible criminal charges. And when you are on your community walks, you should keep an eye on these things to make sure that they appear to be working. For instance, are the exit signs intact? Or are the fire extinguishers where they're supposed to be? If you are not sure where these are in your building, make sure to check with your RHC or returning RA staff member. It is also extremely important to remind your residents not to hang anything from the sprinklers in the room or to throw things in the hall. These activities can lead to setting off the sprinkler system that was affected. I unfortunately have seen how much water comes out of these tiny sprinklers. It's massive and terrifying and smelly. Really, really smelly. The West Virginia State Fire Marshal is very active at WVU. He often stops by each residence hall, including student rooms, to check for violations. Our fire marshal does have arrest powers, and he has used them. Just a couple reminders. Watch for students covering their smoke detectors, putting things under their door, burning popcorn to hide their behavior. And finally, for most cases, the RHC on call does not need to be called for fire alarms. There are some exceptions, like an actual fire, sprinkler going off, or being evacuated in severe weather for an extended amount of time. And as Smokey Bear says, only you can prevent a forest fire. The unauthorized entry policy has been tweaked some for this year. We brought back the 2018-2019 residence life policy with a few minor tweaks. The old unauthorized entry policy stated that unauthorized entry or use means to enter or remain without consent or lawful purpose in any building, room, structure, facility, vehicle, construction area, rooftop, or other premises. So as you can see, we've spelled out what it means more to add clarity and assist us in enforcement. Some of the policy that I'd like to highlight for you are the following. Section B. Enter or occupy any restricted, locked, or closed residence hall area. This includes, but not limited to, roofs, facility, closets, offices, dining halls, computer labs, mechanical areas, fitness centers, student rooms, closed floors, elevators, and etc. So that mirrors the old policy a lot. Section C. Enter residence hall through a residence hall window. This section of the policy ties in closely with our safety and security policy, which states that window screens are not to be removed under any condition due to danger to life or property. Dropping, throwing, or allowing solid or liquid objects to go out of a window or off of a balcony or fire escape is prohibited. Residents may not tamper with, manipulate, remove bolts or screws, things like that, or remove window screens and or safety screens. And Section D, enter another room via shared bathroom without permission of the occupants. If you have suite-style bathrooms on your floor, this is definitely something that you will want to mention when working on roommate agreements, or even before then, really. This is often a high area of frustration between suite mates, especially if they did not know there were suite mates coming into the school year. So make sure they have worked out their expectations for each other before this becomes a big problem. Section E, use bathrooms that do not correlate to their gender, gender identity, or gender expression. Section F, have more than one occupant in a bathroom stall, shower, or pod-style bathroom unit at one time. Section G, propping exterior doors, emergency exits, or alarm doors. This is something that we see on a fairly regular basis. When you are on your community walks, make sure that you inspect the doors. Just push on them to make sure that they are properly closed. Sometimes students will place the smallest items in the door jamb to keep it from shutting enough to where it won't lock. Section J. Access to the building for people who have been removed, banned, or restricted. At each front desk, there is a red binder that will be updated with a list of people, often with their photos, of individuals, both student and non-student, who are not allowed to enter the building. This is our banned book. Banned individuals should not be given access to areas or buildings that are listed on their profile sheet. If a banned individual tries to check in at a desk, they should be denied entry and asked to leave the building. If a banned individual is found in an area that they have been banned from, university police should be contacted. Make sure you review this list before you work the desk. This is also an important reminder that when you are working the front desk, that you are paying close attention to who is coming in and out of the building. While you are allowed to work on your homework at the desk, this shouldn't be your primary focus. You shouldn't count on being able to get your paper done or finish an online quiz. You are there to provide excellent customer service, and you are an integral part of keeping the residence halls safe. With buildings and visitation being more locked down this year due to COVID-19, this policy may be something we need to be especially in tune with. We all know our students listen to us and respond to reasonable requests, right? Well, most do, but sometimes they can be a tad difficult. This was actually our sixth most charged policy last year. It was used 165 times. It addresses a student's interference or uncooperative behavior when engaging with staff who are doing their job and or when the student disregards a reasonable request. I can't command someone to take out my trash or make me a sandwich. That would get me in a lot of trouble with anyone, especially with my wife. You all doing it to your residents would be an abuse of power and you'd lose respect quick. We sometimes run into this when a staff member asks a student if they can come into their room because there is reasonable belief that a policy violation is taking place and the student refuses. Or when a student is playing loud music and the staff member asks them to reduce the sound, but the student refuses. Or even when a student chugs the beer instead of pouring it down the sink. And I've seen that firsthand. It is also important to remember that this policy also covers a student using abusive, threatening, or combative language, both verbal and written. Some things to remember in these situations. When writing an incident report, the staff must give a narrative explaining the behavior of the resident leading up to the uncooperative behavior. This is really important for the conduct officer. It's critical to remain calm. The goal is to de-escalate the situation. If you try to play the part of the big bad enforcer, trust me, things aren't going to end well. Now, on the other hand, don't be a pushover. I was really bad at this my first year when I was an RA at Brook Tower. Shout out to third floor. I would go into a room and apologize for having to document the students. I would say things like, "I'm sorry, I have to ask, but would you mind if you open your fridge for me?" Mind? Mind? Of course they mind. Those first incidents did not go well for me. They could smell my insecurity and they took advantage of it. Instead, go in there and be assertive, which is totally different than being a jerk, and tell them what you need them to do. Make it seem like there is no other option. Resident Heidi, open the fridge. Thank you. If a student refuses to cooperate on the first request, don't just give up right there. Ask them again. In these situations, I've also mentioned to the students that I want to include in my report that everyone was very cooperative. Sometimes it resonates with them, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it resonates with at least someone in the room. In the end, if they still don't comply, make sure to document the situation as you experience it with as much information as you can. This will help the conduct officer when hearing the case. As always, if there is a concern of safety to you or others, we want you to remove yourself from that situation and contact the RHC on call and the university police. When you debrief tonight, ask your fellow RAs how have they handled the situation and get suggestions from your RHC as well. Where do you think our alcohol policy ranked in the list of violated policies last year? Survey says first place. Last year we had 1,448 individual charges of violating some part of our alcohol policy. Once again, this was just up until we left for spring break. Now, I also want to mention that not all 1,448 charges ended up being held responsible. Regardless, this is a situation you most likely will address and need to be prepared for. Obviously, alcohol is not permitted in the residence hall, not even if you're 21. Our policy comes directly from the Campus Student Code. You can see the entire policy on your screen. For our intents and purposes, we primarily deal with Section 1 of this code. Those under the age of 21 who consume or possess alcohol, and Section 4, who is in public or on university premise in an intoxicated condition. How do we come across alcohol? Well, this is normally encountered when staff are on a community walk and approach a room concerning a potential disruption, or when they hear noises that create a suspicion of alcohol possession or consumption occurring in the room. What do I mean? It is not uncommon to hear the sounds of someone yelling, "Chug, chug, chug," or "Drink, drink, drink." Sometimes you'll hear other drinking games like beer pong. Often the room will have loud music, and when staff knock, things will get quiet real fast. And you may even hear, "Shh, it's the RAs." Remember, we're not the police. We're not actively searching out policy violations. Most of these incidents come from going to address disruptions. So of course, we also have to address this behavior when we come across it. There are a few disclaimers that I want to throw out, and your RHC will also talk about their expectations for you in confronting situations, especially when dealing with alcohol. First, just because a room is being loud doesn't mean students are drinking in the room. You do need to have a reasonable suspicion to go into a room, like when you hear the drink, drink, drink comment, or you smell alcohol wafting from the room before the door is even opened, or when the occupant is talking to you. The sound of glass containers through the door does not freely give staff permission to ask residents to open a microfridge, dresser drawers, etc., without further justification, such as the sound of one of these items opening and closing. Do you remember what we talked about earlier about going into a room? Make sure you visually scan the room. Be thorough, but we aren't going to be obtrusive. We're not looking under and over every item in the room. And we're making certain that the door remains open in the event you need to leave the room. Remember to have students handle all alcohol, including dumping it out. Staff should never touch the alcohol. All students in the room should be recorded for the information report. Remember, this is just an information report. You're not the judge. You are just documenting everything you know, which includes who was present. The residents in the room will have their opportunity to plead the case to the conduct officer. If they argue that they were not drinking, or if someone specifically claims responsibility, you should, however, include any of these type of statements in your report for the conduct officer to also consider. As I mentioned earlier, be assertive. But if a student refuses reasonable requests, we don't want to escalate the situation to a point of explosion. If they continue to refuse your request, document it with all the information you have. At your debrief tonight, make sure you talk to your returning RAs and your RHC about the alcohol policy and what tips they have for confronting these type of situations. Just like our alcohol policy, our drug policy comes directly from the campus student code. Prohibited drug-related conduct means possessing, manufacturing, producing, distributing, selling, possessing with the intent to distribute or sell, or being under the influence of any illicit drug, synthetic drug, or other controlled substances. It also means using any prescribed drug in a manner inconsistent with the prescription, driving or operating a vehicle while under the influence of any illicit drug, synthetic drug, or controlled substance, or intentionally or recklessly inhaling, ingesting, or using any manner inconsistent with its purpose any chemical, liquid, substance, or other compound. Drug use, especially marijuana, is usually encountered when staff are on a community walk or arriving onto the floor from being away from class, etc. Smells are the most obvious signs of this behavior, and determining its source can be difficult, even for UPD. Occasionally, smells will be embedded upon the clothes and persons of residents that smoked outside the building recently. There are a few things to remember. Staff must provide in their advocate incident report a narrative that explains the rationale for contacting UPD about their suspicion of drug use, especially describing with good detail where and how smells, sounds, sights occurred. UPD will submit their own report about the specifics of what goes on in the room and what is found, but your report will be all that we have that documents what happens before they get there. Staff are encouraged to remain present in the hallway or common spaces near the area or room of concern until University Police arrives. Staff should not handle drugs or related items at any time. University Police will handle the disposal or confiscation of all drugs. If there is an instance where an officer does ask you to handle these materials, the staff must decline and report the instance to their supervisor via email. Staff do not enter rooms under suspicion of drug use. Contact UPD immediately. They will handle the investigation. If you come across illegal drugs while dealing with a different situation, you should contact the University Police to come dispose of the drugs or drug paraphernalia. Now, while marijuana is probably the most recognizable drug for us staff members, it is important for us to be alert that other things that may be in our buildings. If you hear of other drug issues on your floor, make sure you contact your RHC during office hours so you all can discuss what steps need to be taken. If you've been around WVU, you've most likely seen the effects of alcohol and drugs. It is important to know that residents and their guests may be held responsible for behaviors related to the consumption of alcohol or illicit drug use, regardless of where the alcohol or drugs are consumed. This policy is covered by the University Student Code of Alcohol or Drug Policies. Staff will usually encounter this type of issue in the evening as students return to the residence halls after being at the bars or house parties. Students with alcohol or drug-related behavior are usually seen stumbling into the lobby while you're working the front desk. The student may have other residents helping to carry them into the building. You may also come across a student passed out in a public space, for instance, the lounge, a public bathroom, or even a stairwell. It is critically important for staff to call UPD for assistance. Staff are not trained medical professionals and should not decide if a student is in need of medical attention. Let's say that again. Join me. Staff are not trained medical professionals and should not decide if a student is in need of medical attention. Always call the University Police to make an assessment. UPD will work with the EMS to determine if a student needs to be taken to the hospital. It should be noted that a student has a right to refuse to be transported to the hospital for further evaluation. If they do not go to the hospital, the police will have the student try to find a responsible host to watch them overnight. If a student can't find a student, a friend, or even a relative to take charge of them, they will be taken to jail. Staff do not need to call the RHC on call unless there is a life-threatening situation or excessive vandalism due to their alcohol or other drug-related behavior. A quick note on alcohol containers and drug paraphernalia. Both alcohol containers and drug paraphernalia are not permitted in our residence halls. As I mentioned earlier, when talking about confiscating non-permitted items, students must dispose of any alcohol containers in their room. This includes things like wine bottles, boxed wine, liquor bottles, and beer cans. We updated the language this year to the policy to add beer boxes and beer cutouts as well. If you do come across any of these items, you will need to have the students empty the container in a sink and then have them dispose of the items in the presence of a staff member. If the student states that the container has sentimental value, the empty container can be confiscated by the staff and kept in a designated storage location. The conduct officer will determine if the item can be returned. While we do have an alcohol container policy, we still do not have an alcohol paraphernalia policy. The presence of these items like a shot glass or beer bong reports that alcohol consumption and or possession may have been violated and should be documented. However, these items themselves are not a policy violation. This can be a little confusing, but if you have questions, make sure to follow them up with your RHC. We do, however, have a drug paraphernalia policy. Drug paraphernalia is not permitted on residence hall property. This includes things like bongs, pipes, hookahs, water pipes, and any other item modified or adapted so that it can be used to use illegal substances. If you come across these things, you will need to contact the University Police for their assistance in disposing of. Remember, you should not be touching these items. Everyone wants to have friends. Unfortunately, in response to COVID-19, there will be some modifications to our visitation policy, at least for the fall semester. Information on visitation will be handled in another presentation. Your RHC or supervisor will follow up with you about this new temporary policy. And hey, if you want to be my friend on Animal Crossing, hit me up! Thank you for your time and attention during this presentation. I know this is a lot of information to cover. Remember, it really is important for you to continue to learn about these policies so you feel comfortable with them. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask your RHC or supervisor. Don't forget about the wealth of information your fellow RA or other returning staff members can be. While we don't trade war stories, talking to your fellow team members can really help. Best wishes for a safe, fun, and as normal semester as we can have. Thanks for watching. I've been your host, Jeremiah Kibler. Back to you in the studio.